Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
So now let us look at the next important property, that is surface tension. So what is surface tension? When a liquid gas or liquid interface exists, or it could be liquid solid interface, the surface tension comes into play. Surface tension is denoted with the symbol sigma. That is the pulling force that causes tension to act parallel to the surface of contact of the two dissimilar fluids or two dissimilar surfaces. So the unit of sigma is Newton per meter length. So force per unit length. Okay. The surface tension is important in cases like formation of water droplets, bubbles, spray, or motion of thin films, or the inkjet printers, and so on. Now, to understand slightly more, let us talk about a thin bubble of radius r. The force trying to separate these two bubbles into two equal halves is equal to what? The pressure acting on the surface multiplied by the surface area. So here the pressure, always we need to consider the projected area, and when we consider the projected area, this is nothing but pi r square, and the pressure that is acting on that surface in both equal or opposite directions is nothing but your delta p, because outside pressure is p, inside p plus delta p, so the change in the pressure difference is delta p. So that is the force effectively acting to separate or split the bubble into two halves. So if we calculate the opposing force that is acting to hold the bubble together, then we have to equate that with the surface tension force. And where this surface tension force is acting, it is acting along the surface. Now if I take the left half, then there is a surface tension acting on this surface on the upper side, and there is the inner surface, there also there is a surface tension force which is acting. So I have two layers, so on both the faces it is acting. Now what is the force? Sigma multiplied by the length. What is the length on the outer surface in that periphery? So what is that? 2 pi r. Now 2 pi r multiplied by sigma is the force. Now because the bubble here, for demonstration purpose, the thickness is shown so large, but it is very thin, so the difference in radius is not going to be much. It is going to be more or less similar. So the force that is acting on the inner side is also going to be added, so it is 2 times 2 pi r sigma. Now if I equate both of these, I will be able to write down that delta p is equals to 4 sigma by r. So from this I can find out what can be a radius, what can be the radius of a bubble for a given internal pressure rise, or what can be the pressure rise if there is a particular radius. So invariably you will be able to find out some unknown parameter that is from a set of given situations. So similarly, if you take a droplet, to understand the difference, if you take a droplet, what happens in the case of droplet? Now water droplet, there is no internal vacuum, or there is no surface present at the inside, only you have a surface on the outer layer. So you don't have 2 times the 2 pi r sigma, you have only 1. So if you equate that, then you will be able to get delta p is equals to 2 sigma by r. So this is a simple problem that, or simple calculation that has been shown you, and you should be able to understand that. All right. Now this surface tension we have also seen in terms of capillary rise in tubes that are inserted into some liquid, that you might have also seen in your chemistry labs that you would have done. So when a capillary tube is inserted into a liquid or water, let us say in this case, the water level rises in the tube by an amount, let us say h1. Okay. And that's what we say is a capillary rise. And now we need to understand how this rise is happening and how much it will rise. Let us say you have the surface, some liquid is there, the surface tension of that liquid is sigma, and it acts at an angle of phi with the surface. So if that is the case, then we need to understand how the force is balanced here. Now how it is balanced? You have a force that is acting upward direction, that is surface tension force. Please understand that there is surface tension is at an angle. Now only the vertical component is actually pulling the whole weight of the water here. So what is this weight of the water that is rising here, that is nothing but your pi r square h1 into gamma. So rho g is nothing but your specific weight of water multiplied by gamma pi r square h is the volume. So that is the weight of the water, and what is pulling it up? That is 2 pi r sigma. So 2 pi r is the radius along the surface that is acting, multiplied by sigma cos theta, or sorry, cos phi. So the component of the force that is acting upward is considered, not in this inclined angle. So finally I can write down the expression h1 is equals to 2 sigma cos phi divided by gamma r, or rho g r. So this will give me h1. Now in certain liquid or fluid, you will find that this phi value is going to be more than 90 degree. When we are measuring from this surface, we are going anticlockwise, the phi value is going to be more than 90 degree. In such cases, the value is going to be negative, or there will be a drop. Instead of rise, there will be a capillary drop. So in case of mercury, it is going to be lower because the angle is going to be more than 90 degrees. All right. So this capillary effect is also going to be negligible if the radius of this tube is going to be more than 10 mm, because the amount of water that has to rise is actually much heavier compared to the force that is acting due to the surface tension. So you may not really feel a lot of rise, that you may feel some effect very close to the surface, but that will be negligible compared to the whole thing. So this is about surface tension. Let us look at a simple example for this property. Now, if I have a ring, the bottom picture shows the top view. So it is a ring which is floating on the water surface, half up to half. So now if I say that it is up to half, I'm looking at the side at a cross section, then you will see something like this. Now I am trying to pull it up and see how much force is required to pull it up. Now for that, what I need to do, I need to first understand what is the diameter of the ring. So that is 20 mm, which is given. Surface tension of the water is already given, 72.8 into 10 to the power minus 3 Newton per meter length. The contact angle is also given, which is considered as 0 here, and the net force has to be 0. So I am trying to find out the minimum force required to pull it up. So at the point when the net force is going to be 0, beyond that or at that moment it will be pulled up. So then net force is W, which is acting downwards, the weight of the ring, and there is a pull which is acting upwards. Now to find out the weight of the ring, if I know the surface tension, I can calculate 2 multiplied by sigma multiplied by pi d cos theta. So what is pi d? Pi d is the circumference that I am taking, assuming that the ring is so small or thin, the d is not really going to change. So I'll multiply that with 2. So pi d multiplied by sigma cos theta. So cos theta here, theta is 0. So cos 0 is equals to 1. Now you get this value, and if you calculate, you will be able to find out what is the weight of the ring. Okay. So these are typical problems that we are solving, but there are many applications which can be understood if we know these concepts. All right. Now let us move to the next classification of fluid. So by definition, ideal fluid is a fluid which is compressible and has 0 viscosity. But in practice or in practical scenario, there is no ideal fluid. Every fluid is real. But for our convenience, we engineers or scientists, we classify that into ideal fluid or real fluid, making some assumptions. So what are the assumptions? In case of ideal fluid, we assume that there is no viscosity or 0 viscosity. There is no surface tension. We assume that the fluid is incompressible. We cannot compress it. And we can assume that there is no resistance that is encountered as it moves. If you have 0 viscosity, then mu is 0. If you calculate the shear stress, tau is equals to mu du by dy. If mu is 0, your stress is going to be 0. If stress is 0, your force is 0. So there is no resistance. So basically it is based on the viscosity. And similarly, ideal fluid does not exist in nature, as I said. But whereas in real fluid, all these properties exist and they are the real fluids in nature. However, fluid with low viscosity, where we find that air, water, the viscosity is very less, and our problem is actually not affected, if we consider the viscosity as 0, then we can assume the fluid is inviscid, or there is 0 viscosity, and still solve the problem. So that's why we assume ideal fluid conditions. But if the effect is significant, then we are not supposed to assume such conditions. We have to take the actual condition and solve the problem. All right. Now let us talk about the problem. I have a fluid flow problem and I want to solve it. So how do I solve it? Obviously, I need to use the equation of motion. And as we have already seen, I can have two different fluids, ideal fluid or real fluid. And if these two fluids are there, the equation of motion is going to be written, which is mostly in a differential equation form. And this differential equation, if you want to solve, what do? You basically integrate the governing equations and solve it in time and space. So when you solve it, or integrate any governing equation, differential equation, what will you get? You will get constants. And these constants you can evaluate based on the conditions satisfied at all times at some specific locations. And this we call it as boundary conditions. And these constant locations are usually present along the boundary, and we call this as boundary conditions. Now, this boundary condition is going to make the problem different for the same governing equation. If I'm using the same governing equation for two different problems, but my boundary conditions vary, then my solution is going to be different, because two different problems obviously should have two different solutions. So this is where the boundary condition needs to be implemented properly. Now, having said this, let us understand how the boundary condition is going to vary for ideal fluid and real fluid. Typically, I am showing you this example. On the left side, if you see, I have a no flow condition. Okay, so what happens in no flow condition? Your velocity in the normal direction to the surface is 0 at y equals to 0. That means at the surface, the normal velocity is 0, whereas the tangential velocity can exist. Okay, so when your fluid is inviscid, there is no viscosity, so there is no resistance. So the fluid can easily move past this surface, whereas it cannot penetrate through the surface. So you have no flow condition in this case. At the same time, if you have real fluid, so this can happen with ideal fluid. Now, if you have real fluid has viscosity, it will have friction, it will have stress at the surface. So the fluid particle at the surface is not going to move. It has to have the same displacement or same speed or same movement with as of the surface. Now, if the surface is static, then the velocity at the surface, tangential velocity at the surface, is also going to be 0. And obviously, it is impervious, so the normal velocity is also going to be 0. So in case of no slip condition, tangential as well as normal velocity both are going to be 0 on the surface. Whereas in case of no slip condition, both the velocities are 0. Whereas in case of no flow condition, only the normal velocity is going to be 0, but tangential velocity may exist. Okay, so we have two different conditions that we can apply for two different types of problems or two different types of fluids here. All right, so now, having understood this, let us quickly understand types of flow. We have seen types of fluid. Now let us look at types of flow. So before we move to types of flow, when the fluid moves, we call it flow. And when it moves, what is happening? It is moving, or the particles of the fluid is moving from one place to another, and the total flow is changing in space as well as in time. So there are two variables, time as well as space. So now, based on these things and their other properties, we have classified different ways. One is steady and unsteady flow, uniform, non-uniform flow, rotational, irrotational flow, laminar and turbulent flow. There is also compressible and incompressible flow. So I will not discuss much about compressible, incompressible in this course, because we will mostly dealing with water or liquid. So most of the liquids are incompressible, and gas is mostly compressible, as you can keep on pushing air into your cycle tube or tire. So it is compressible, that we know, but that is more applicable when we go for aerodynamics. But if we don't consider gas or air, then we are mostly in the incompressible regime. So we'll talk about the other four characters classifications. So let us talk about steady unsteady flow. It is mostly dependent on time. The moment we call steady unsteady, it is with something to do with time. The fluid characteristics at a given point do not change with time. Fluid characteristic at a given point do not change with time. So that means the flow of water with constant discharge rate. So in that case, the fluid characteristics are not going to change with time. So the velocity is not going to change with time. That means du by dt is equals to 0. Pressure is not going to change with time. Dou p by dou t is equals to 0. Density is not going to change with time. Dou rho by dou t is equals to 0. So for a steady flow, there is no change with respect to time. So anything you take the derivative with respect to time is 0. At the same time, if we have unsteady flow, the fluid characteristics do change with time. So it is not equals to 0. You cannot take it as 0. So dou u by dou t, dou p by dou t, dou rho by dou t are not equal to 0. So difference between steady and unsteady flow is with respect to time. If the property change, it is unsteady. If it doesn't change, it is steady. All right. Similarly, if we talk about uniform and non-uniform flow, similar to the previous one, here it is with respect to space. Now, if I say the whole room that I'm sitting is at a temperature of 30 degrees, so it is everywhere uniform. And let us say a class is wearing some red color dress, so it is uniform. So in space, everything is same. So at any given instant of time, if the fluid properties does not change both in magnitude and direction in space, the flow is said to be uniform. So basically, any property, we may call it velocity, let us say. So dou u by dou s, s is in space, at a given time is equals to 0. Let us say after 2 minutes, the room temperature might increase by 1 degree. So that is fine. At this time, it was uniform all through the room. At another time, it is uniform again all through the room. So the condition is uniform. Okay. But if I want to talk about steady unsteady, at the same time, if it has changed from this time to the next time, this is unsteady. It is not steady. If the room temperature remains at 27 degrees all through the room as well as all through the time, let us say next 1 hour or 2 hours. So within this time, this is uniform as well as steady. Okay. Now let us look at non-uniform. If the properties are changing, let us say here, because of my body temperature, the temperature is higher and other places it is lower. So it is non-uniform. Similarly, if the fluid property changes from point to point at any time instant, then the flow is non-uniform. So dou u by dou s at time t equals to t1 or anything is not equals to 0. So it is non-uniform. All right. Now similarly, there is a characteristic called rotational flow or irrotational flow. When we call it rotational flow, when we call it irrotational flow, let us look at the definitions first. A flow is said to be rotational if the fluid particles, while moving in the direction of flow, rotate about their mass centers. Okay. Now, if I'll take any object, okay, it is moving in the flow and it is also rotating about its mass center. So that is called rotational flow. And if the same object is moving with the fluid, but it is not moving about its mass center, then it is called irrotational flow. Okay, so the object is different. The flow we want to characterize. Now flow we can characterize just by taking example if the object that is put or placed in the on the flow, how it is behaving. Or in other words, we tell that the particles, water particles or fluid particles in the flow are behaving that way. So we are just putting the object to see the behavior of the particles. So particles are also moving about their mass center. Okay. So now if you look at the first picture where it is a forced vortex, or you have a tank and you are rotating the tank, all right, and there is fluid inside. So what will happen? It will create some kind of profile like this. You have a concave profile and you have high water level at the sides and low water level at the middle. And this water, when it moves, it will have a variation of velocity that is from starting zero velocity at the center, close to zero velocity at the center, to the maximum velocity at the wall, okay, where it is moving as a rigid body motion. And this is called a forced vortex. And if you put, let us say, a stick that is shown here, the stick is going to move like this. So you see the stick was like this, now it has come to this point, which is showing that the mass, it has already rotated about its mass center, so it is a rotational flow. Now in this case, which is a free vortex, you have a basin, you open your tap or leave some mass of water, it is going to spiral and sink at the middle. So in that kind of flow, what is going to happen, your velocity is going to reduce. So there is a different profile. As you go away from the center, the velocity is reducing. And if you leave an object on top of that, you will see in this kind of flow, the fluid or the particles are not changing their orientation about their mass center, or they are not moving about their mass center. So they are irrotational flow. Okay, so these two are typical examples, but there can be many more examples for this. But in practice or in practical scenarios, mostly the flow are rotational. But in certain cases, when we find the rotational or rotation is very less or insignificant, we can still consider the flow as irrotational and analyze that. Now next classification is laminar and turbulent flow. So when we talk about laminar and turbulent flow, it is very simple to understand. If the flow moves with layers, there are layers of flow which is moving, there is not much disturbance within the flow, or fluid flows in parallel layers, then we call it as a laminar flow. And if there is a lot of disturbance, the fluid particles move in an abrupt random manner when this is flowing, so then we call it turbulent flow. So this laminar flow or turbulent flow, it is not possible to visualize easily through naked eyes always. So most of the times we need to have some kind of indirect way of representing that. There is a number called Reynolds number, which we will study in the due course of time. So in case of pipe flow, this Reynolds number is less than 2000 for pipe flow, and if it is more than 4000, then it is called turbulent flow. And if it is in between 2000 to 4000, we call it transitional flow. All right. Now let us understand also the nature of fluid flow and various dimensions. We know already that any fluid problem or physical problem can be defined in 3 dimensions. So it has X, Y, and Z. And sometimes for understanding or calculations, we also have another dimension, that is time, how things are changing in time. So now it is 4 dimensions, but most of the times time we don't account for. We mostly consider as a steady state condition, and we tell that as 3D. So let us say you have a flow where flow is steady state and you have X, Y, Z direction. So we can call that flow as 3D. Okay. But now let us look at a typical problem. You have a flow through plane expansion. So you have one plane here, another plane here, and there is a flow which is taking place. Now I can define the velocity u as a variation of x and y, or a function of x and y. So u is going to vary in x direction as well as u is going to vary in y direction. And in z direction, because it is uniform and the same plane is continuing, there is no change. So it is now a 2D problem. Okay. If we take an average value, so there is one u which is not varying along the y-axis, and it is varying only in the x-axis, then it is going to be a function of x only. So I can specify this problem as one-dimensional, or the problem becomes one-dimensional. So the same problem, depending on its importance, depending on the importance of various parameters, I can define which is the variation or which is the variable, and I can define whether the problem is 1D or 2D or 3D. So similarly, there is another example. In this case, if you look at, there is a flow through one converging section, and then there is a static section. So initially when the flow is entering the converging section, which is going to change, or the velocities are going to change in x, y directions if this is a flat plane. And if at some point there is no more change in the profile and the velocity is remaining same, so obviously the velocity is not going to change in the x direction, it is only going to change in the y direction. So it is a function of y only. So then we have the problem in 1D. So depending on the problem statement, you can define whether you can take 1D or 2D or 3D and analyze. And in case of cylindrical coordinates, you have u is equals to u x r theta. So r is the radius and theta is the angle. And if you have a symmetric flow problem, then obviously theta is not going to really matter. So you have only x and r. So the flow can become 2D, or it can be analyzed in 2 dimensions. Finally, let us understand how we solve these problems. We have mainly 3 different ways in practice. Either we understand the processes using experiments, or we have some analytical methods, or we have numerical methods. So in experimental methods, we can conduct the experiments and understand, but it is expensive, time consuming, and some of the experiments cannot be really conducted and they may be impractical. Let us say I want to understand tsunami. Can I generate a tsunami? Possibly no. So it is impractical. And there are analytical methods, which is really fast. It is inexpensive, but results depend on assumptions, because in analytical methods, we have to make a lot of assumptions or approximate. So which is often difficult. Some of the problems we may not be able to solve. So there is the next process, which is numerical solutions. So the differential equations which we write to represent the physical process, we can take them and solve it using some numerical techniques, and which is more popular nowadays and can handle more complex problems. And there are many software packages which are available. You need to understand the physics inside and understand how it is solved, and then you can use that to solve the problems. But having said all this, it is always a good practice that you use numerical modeling or analytical models to analytical methods to choose few options for the problem, or start understanding. And once you figure out, okay, this is what is going to happen, or this is the final setup, then you try to carry out at least the experiment to ensure that yes, all the work that you have done using numerical model or numerical method is correct. So it is not only straightforward that okay, you forget about experiments. Experiment is equally important as the numerical models or numerical modeling. So you have to have a judicious balance between both. Okay, so with this we'll stop today's class. We have learned various aspects of fluid properties. We have seen fluid classifications, and we have seen various ways of solving the fluid problems. So with this we'll stop here, and in next class we'll continue with fluid statics. Thank you. Have a good day.